And thank you, Nancy, for inviting me back here. I think the last time I was speaking to a club here was when Bob invited me to speak to the Wellington Club. And I think that was before COVID. But I also remember coming down here when I was district governor. That goes back almost 30 years. But nevertheless, I was always very impressed with the enthusiasm and the commitment of Rotarians in this community and the other communities around. Very different from Rotary in Toronto. When we come to a community such as Trenton, Picton, Belleville, Coburg, Brighton, I don't know whether the Brighton Club still exists, but again, very much bringing people together from the community. And it's something we miss in Toronto. So I'm delighted to come back here, even though it was a 2.5-hour drive. And at one stage, I was a bit concerned that we might not make it because we were stuck behind a very slow-moving tractor trailer. And I suggested to Hannah that, there are some dotted lines there you can overtake. She said, I'm not going to overtake until I can see a mile clear ahead. But anyway, fortunately, that truck turned off at one of the roads and we made it okay. Again, thank you for being with you. Water, sanitation, and hygiene. Before I go back there, achieving a lasting impact. And that's what I want to speak to you today about. I don't want to talk about particular projects. I could go on for, a couple of days talking about some of the projects, WASH project, water sanitation and hygiene projects that are available, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and so forth. And then, of course, many, many project opportunities in India, where there are over 120,000 Rotarians looking for support from organizations such as this Rotary Club, or in South America, where Rotarians in Peru, for example, have done a wonderful job with the biosand filter, set it up as a business so which the community, which the users can support instead of giving it away. People are renting or buying the biosand filter. There's so many opportunities like that around the world. Mention a country, and I could give you some examples. But you can go to the Rotary web. You can go to the WashRag website and see what some of these opportunities are. But I want to put all of this in the greater context of what we need to do to change our impact on the WASH world. And that's why I'm talking about lasting impact. Those were the goals, Millennium Development Goals and target for 2015. And it was to achieve significant accomplishments. There we have it. The number of people that should have... Anna, can you just pass me my glasses? Just want to be able to look at this screen close up. I can see the big screen. I can see long distance. I can see all you guys. I just have problems with short vision. In 2000, the idea was that we wanted to improve access to water. We wanted to reduce by 50% those who lacked access to safe water. And so Rotarians and many other organizations embarked on a lot of different projects around the world. Boreholes, wells, building toilets, latrines, putting in hand washing facilities, sometimes in schools, sometimes in healthcare facilities, sometimes in the local community marketplace, and so forth. But it was a great accomplishment. And as you can see in those days, both water and sanitation, a huge challenge. So much has been accomplished since then. You can see the change from 2000 to 2020. Fewer people lacking access, particularly to water, but also to sanitation. Rotarians particularly participated in this improvement. And many organizations, those are the goals, as you can see. But this is the crucial message. Access did not mean sustainable access. Access meant, in some cases, just providing a community with a borehole so there was water there at that time. Or building a toilet, putting in a latrine that was working when they turned it over to the community. But 6 months later, it might not be functioning. And the same was true, not just with Rotary, it was true with many other non-governmental organizations, World Vision, Water Aid, Water for People, all the other organizations working in parallel, in some cases with Rotary, working in the same community, but all trying to do the same, achieve the same goal, i.e. provide sustainable water or sanitation or hygiene to community. But it wasn't working. And as you can see here was a borehole and somebody's ripped the top off it. It's not working. Another example of a borehole no longer working, no longer functioning. Or here you can see somebody's ripped off the part from that faucet. Or in some cases, we found that the water tank, the plastic storage tank, the plastic cisterns were being damaged deliberately in some cases. There was one community where a school had water cistern like this, rainwater harvesting, but only the school had it. And the community, some of the other people in the community were very upset by this, so they said, screw it. They're not going to have water at the school if we can't have it at the community. Instead of thinking about how they could extend the supply of water to the community, they said, we will rip apart these tanks. So you can see the holes there in these cisterns. Again, not sustainable. Or toilets, in some cases were theft, the doors. So, I mean, early days, the doors were wood, they were ripped off. Everybody wanted wooden doors for their own homes, their own toilets, and so forth. And so it went on. And we were just not achieving lasting impact. So then the community, the world community, shifted its focus, not just access to water and sanitation, but sustainable access. And it was described in the Sustainable Development Goals. And the idea was that wherever we provided water, sanitation, or hygiene, that would be sustainable for the life of the community or the life of the household, for example. For the phrase used was forever. But that had all kinds of implications, as you will see. And it means that we need to think about 4 components for sustainability. The community must own it. Now, in the early days of Rotary, where we were talking about the Millennium Development Projects, Rotarians would come to a village, they'd put in a borehole or dig a well, and then give it to the community and say, here you are. But the community hadn't been engaged in that. In some cases, they would have provided a borehole that needed, it might have been solar-driven, submersible pump, or maybe a hand pump. But nobody had shown them how to maintain that facility. So when it broke down, there was no funding available. Technology wasn't available. They didn't have the technicians. In other words, 6 months after a well had been drilled and the pump installed, it wasn't working. And that was the example of what was happening. And you're applying for toilets, latrines, hand washing facilities, and so forth. There was no long-term commitment. So start with the community. There's got to be the right technology. There's also got to be appropriate funding, because we recognize that whenever a community gains access to any kind of water facility, there's got to be some money to maintain it. Spare parts, for example, paying a technician to fix it. That kind of example. Similarly, the toilet, if it needs fixing, where are the resources coming from? So we've got to think about long-term funding. I'm not quite sure what happened there. I must have pressed the wrong button. I did. My fingers were. There we are. And the other, the monitoring and evaluating, checking on what's happening. So that is the essence of where we stand. So let's look at these now in turn. And this is the essence. If we want a project to be sustainable, and you're going to be called upon from time to time, or you may get involved with the Rotary Club in the developing world. They want your help. They want your participation. Then I think from the beginning, recognize that if these elements aren't in place, then you may be raising money or providing support for something which isn't going to last. So think whenever you're invited, whenever you're involved or thinking of getting involved in a WASH project, for that matter, any kind of humanitarian project. It could be a basic educational literacy. It could be maternal and child health. Always think in these terms, the community ownership and technology and funding and monitoring. Why isn't that advancing? Let's see what's happening here. It moved forward, but okay. No, batteries. I think batteries okay. Yeah, batteries okay. Okay, well, look, I'll just advance it manually. There we are. Okay. You better stand ready. I may need help to advance the next. Okay, go capacity building. The community has to own and manage the service. In other words, we don't go into a community, fill a borehole, provide a well, and then say to the community, here it is. As I mentioned earlier, it's going to take funding to maintain that facility. And we may have put in we may have thought, in fact, I'm going through this exercise right now in Haiti, where the Rotarians want to put in a solar-driven submersible pump. And they think that would be the right thing to do. Well, it may be, but a solar-driven submersible pump takes a lot more effort and resources to maintain than a simple manual pump. They haven't sat down with the community to say, what can you afford in the long term? So when we're thinking about any kind of technology, it comes back to the community. What can you afford in the long term? And that's absolutely vital. We in Rotary often want to put in something very sophisticated. Well, in Haiti, for example, they want to put in a very sophisticated system. Now, you know a lot about Haiti. You've read about it. You've heard about it. Not the easiest country in which to work. Certainly not very affluent communities. So we're wrestling right now. And the point I'm making is, let's find out what the community can afford. Then we can decide with them participating, whether it's going to be a solar-driven submersible pump or whether it's a simple hand pump. Obviously, if we're putting a simple hand pump, we'd save money. But in the eyes of, quote, the Rotarians, it's not as sophisticated as they would like to see. So we've got to be very, very careful that we're providing what the community wants and can afford, not just what we as outsiders think what they need. So that's why it's essential that the community involved in the initial decision. And what is the community? If it's a Washington Schools project, well, clearly the school community, the principal, the staff, parent teachers association, local board of education, whatever it may be. Similarly, if it's Washington Healthcare, i.e. Washington Community Health Center, hospital or clinic, what's the community there? Well, clearly, it's the superintendent of the hospital or the facility, the nursing staff, the maintenance staff, and the local health authority, and maybe a higher level regional authority that fund these things. The community has to be engaged. And wherever we're thinking of a community, whenever a Rotary Club anywhere is thinking about a project of one kind, engage with the community. Take time to listen to what they can afford, listen to what they want, and tell us what they want. And remember that we in Rotary have not just Rotarians, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Let's listen in that proportion. Let's listen, let's understand, and then internalize, and then work with them, facilitate discussions, carry out surveys of one kind or another, questionnaires, interviews, understand what the community wants, needs, and can afford. And of course, a very important part of that is the technological capability. That links into the next session on next slide on the technology. But the technology has to be appropriate. It's got to be technology which they can manage. It's got to be a technology where there is a plentiful supply of spare parts and other resources. Now, we'll see if we can move ahead. Aha! Thank you very much. Your golden touch has solved the problem. Appropriate technology. And appropriate technology is not what we think is needed. It is what they can afford, what they can manage, and do they have the technological skills? And here again, we've got to think long term. We in Rotary are usually involved in the initial investment, CapEx, the capital expenditure. Very seldom are we part of the ongoing funding, providing funds for maintenance, operations, repairs, and so forth. And yet that's what the community is going to be paying for. We provide the initial installation, but after that, the community has to be able to maintain it and operate it. Is it appropriate in every sense of the word? Technological capacity, ongoing funding, and other resources that might supplies. Is there an available supply of spare parts, for example? Is there a distribution system? Is there a local warehouse or a distributor who can support the system? These are all parts of that decision on technology. And we talk about the life cycle analysis. I won't get into too much detail there. Those of us in engineering know that we're trading off all the time the initial capital outlay and the ongoing funding. We need to know what the cost is going to be over the life cycle of something. In Rotary, however, most of the time we're providing the initial capital investment. So our focus needs to be on the ongoing operating and maintenance expense. And then the next concern we have is funding. Too often in the past, we in Rotary have seen ourselves as a charitable organization, providing, in some cases, funds, helping provide technology, and providing some training. If it is to be truly sustainable, let's think of how the community could make a business out of that particular service. Let me give you an example. This comes back to Volta, as a matter of fact, in Ghana. They're an organization called Water Missions. It's another non-governmental organization put in a filtration system south of Lake Volta, and they're providing water. So one of the women in community close by said, gee, this is great. So she had a cart, mule-drawn cart, which would carry about 6 jerry cans of water. So she would come, fill up the jerry can, she'd pay, quote, the wholesale price. She would then go to the community and deliver these jerry cans of water to the householders and collect money. She had a vested interest in that system being sustained. And there are many other examples like that. I mentioned Peru, biosand filters. There, initially, the Rotarians were providing biosand. By the way, how many of you are familiar with the biosand filter? You know the term? No? Oh, a great, great Rotary project. Essentially, a biosand filter is filters which Rotarians at the household level can make. It's a concrete prism, and inside there is sand and gravel, and on the top, a biological layer. And when you then pour the water in, and that biological water kills any of the bacteria, and the sand and the gravel clarify the water. So out of this biosand filter, you can get potable water. This Rotary Club in Lima was providing a lot of these filters to the local community. The community was getting the water from the local river, pouring it in the biosand filter, and it was drinkable. But I was down there with them. I said, tell me, how are you going to be able to maintain this business of providing filters? Oh, we'll get another global grant, or a matching grant as it was in those days. I said, but let's think about this. What is this filter worth to a typical household? Well, don't know. Okay, let's go and talk to some of the householders that are using them. So we interviewed some women who were using this, who were very pleased, by the way, with the results of the filter, very pleased with what it was doing. And we spoke to one of these women and said, tell me, before you had the biosand filter, what did you do for water? Well, we bought it from a trucker. Okay, how much did it cost? Well, maybe 12 soles or 12, whatever the units were. And I said, okay, you were paying 12, you're now paying 9. How much would you be prepared to pay for the water from this filter? Oh, maybe $6, whatever it was, $6. Okay. So the Rotarian sat down and said, okay, these people would be prepared to pay 6 drachma, soles, whatever it was. Okay, let's see what kind of business we can build around that. So they then put the numbers together and discovered that they could, in fact, sell these units to the householders and make a reasonable profit or reasonable return, or alternatively, rent them out and the householders would pay for them. But they were establishing a business. Those funds would come in, then be going to a revolving fund that enabled them to provide more biosand filters and maintain the flow and supply. In other words, it was no longer a charity, it was a business. Yesterday, I was on a Zoom call with the University of North Carolina, where this week there is a week-long program on water, sanitation, and hygiene. Normally, I'd have been there, but for personal reasons, I couldn't make it this year. There was a session on market-based sanitation. Now, we normally think of providing toilets to the communities, but in this area, they're saying, no, we can't be a charity. We can't keep providing toilets. People have to pay for them. Okay, how do we get them to do that? Well, they put together a business case that, look, if in this community you were to pay this much for a toilet, you would have it forever, it would work, and you would not have these diseases. The girls would be able to attend school, and they put together a business case. So now, whenever Rotarians talk about sanitation, invariably you'll hear business-based sanitation. In fact, in Singapore, or was it the year before in Melbourne? I forget. One of the programs was on business-based sanitation. Experts giving their experience on how communities were able to afford to buy toilets at the household level. Another example, how to make it sustainable, but business case, not charity. And there are public-private partnerships. You can establish pricing and payment mechanisms. Global grants, when a global grant can be used at the front end to, say, the CapEx, the initial capital outlay, but then after that, is there a mechanism whereby ongoing funding will be available? Social entrepreneurship, examples of, quote, small business in the WASH world. Evaluation, monitoring and evaluation, achieving the objectives. If we want a system to last forever, we need to know that it is performing continuously. So therefore, when we implement with a community a WASH project early on, let's agree immediately on what we're going to measure. If we're putting in a borehole, many times I will read that we're going to measure whether it's producing water or not. That's the first very important measure. If it's not producing water, it's not working. But much more significant than that is what impact is the water having, or what's the outcome the water is having in the community? Maybe it's WASH in schools. Maybe we put in a borehole or rainwater harvesting at the school level. Kids are now attending school, and that would be particularly important for young girls during the menstrual cycle. They don't miss a week's schooling. They can stay at school. They have facilities for washing themselves and staying clean and so forth. Again, an example of what we want to measure. And from the very beginning, we need to decide. When I say from the very beginning, I mean in that initial discussion with the community, decide what we're going to measure, because we want to measure that particular metric at the beginning. We want to know what the baseline is. We want to know what the system is doing right now. How many kids are missing school? How many girls are dropping out? How many people are getting sick with typhoid, diphtheria, polio, or anything of that nature? We need to have those measures so that we can track, in fact, that we are having an impact on that community. We need sound financial administrative practices, obviously. We need to agree on the metrics. There's got to be systematic data collection. It could be visits to a community, for example. If we're putting a borehole, a well, call it what you will, we need to know that it's functioning all the time. What is the performance? Is it 100% uptime? Is it 70% uptime? If it's less than 100%, why is that? What needs to be done? In other words, we want to use this information to feedback and help us make corrections so that it is, in fact, an ongoing, sustainable system. So those are the 4 elements of how become sustainable. And here we get into WashRag, Water and Sanitation Rotarian Action Group, how we can help you in helping Rotary clubs around the world. First of all, we can help you find a project. Let's assume that your club decided you want to get involved in a WASH project somewhere around the world. There are projects listed on our website. Or if you call the organization WashRag, info@WashRag, say, I want a WASH project, they'll help you. You might want a project somewhere in the Caribbean or South America, so you don't miss a day's traveling flying to Africa or India or somewhere like that. But we can help you find a project which is within your capacity, tailored to your needs, and how you would like to help some club somewhere. We can tell you what the best practices are, how to go about designing and planning a project. What are the things you have to consider? Listed them previously, but we can go into the depth. We can help you decide how to do a community assessment. 10 years ago in Rotary, we talked about a needs assessment. But too often, that meant we, as Rotarians, we as outsiders, would go into a community and tell them or decide what they needed. Much better to have and think of a community assessment. And we look at all the assets and the liabilities and the strengths and weaknesses in the community. What is their capacity to pay rent, for example, or the capacity to maintain and sustain a system? We need to understand everything about that capacity. And that, of course, goes back to that community involvement from the very beginning, getting them as to lead the team, not just passive responders. They take ownership. They decide what to do. We help them. Identify potential matching clubs. And now most of the time, this is focused on clubs from developing world, Africa, particularly, but Latin America, Central America, India. Clubs there saying, we have a need, find an international partner. So that's where, through WashRag, we can put a club in Mysore, for example, in India, in touch with a club here in District 7070, or some other district in North America, or district in Europe, or Australia, for example, that has the resources and would like to help. But we can bring them both together, acting as brokers, if you like, between clubs that have a need and clubs with the resources. Facilitate partnerships and attracting donors. We bring in money too. Perhaps one of the best examples that I can think of is a number of years ago, our club was involved in a project just north of Mumbai in India, Bombay to most of us. In fact, the club was Bombay Central, even though the city is now Mumbai. And this is a project in which the club was working with a tribal community which depended on the monsoon rains to grow rice. Monsoon rains are intense, they come very suddenly, and they've got to use it so they'll grow rice. But rice is a relatively low-value crop. So the Rotary Club there said, damn it, if we can hold back the water, don't let it run away. So they put in check dams, gully plugs to hold the water. So there was a year-round supply of water. That meant that tribal community no longer depended on low-value rice crop. They could get involved in cash crops, fruit, vegetables, and so forth. Much more sustainable and much more economically viable. At the time, we found that the Royal Bank of Canada was interested in developing its practice in India. And so we approached, and I personally approached them through some leverage there, and we arranged for a $100,000 grant from the Royal Bank of Canada to help the Rotary Club of Bombay Central achieve its goals. But there are other sources of funding. I'm always reminded of a slogan, the end of the road in Guyana. You come to this place. The place is called, it's a community called Charity. It's the end of the road. There you get on the boat to go upriver. And there's this convenience store right there. And the sign outside is save water, drink beer. Breweries need safe water. They are a great source of, a great resource as we think about other places to fund. So these are some of the things that WashRag can help you with. Rotary is leading the eradication of polio. In fact, there's a hiccup, as you know, right now in polio around the world. And this year, one of the themes in Rotary might be wash away polio. Nevertheless, someday we're going to get to the end of polio. And the question is, what do we do next? Are we ready? Are we ready to launch sustainable programs which will have a true long-term impact on the communities? Thank you very much.